The February 19th, 2013 meeting and public hearing of the Falls Church Planning Commission is now in order. Ms. G, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Jung? Ms. Hockenberry?
Here.
Mr. Meeks?
Here.
Mr. Rankin?
Here.
Ms. Rogers?
Here.
Ms. Teets? Here. Mr. Bodiska?
Here.
Thank you.
Rob, would you like to move adoption of the agenda?
I move that we adopt the agenda.
Is there a second? Second. Thank you. It's been moved and second that we adopted the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Are there any planning commissioner reports?
My mic doesn't work.
Oh,
But I went to it's a brief report. I went to the CACT meeting on Wednesday. And other than talking about the WNOD trail upgrades that you had heard about recently, there's also a new traffic calming case that's going to come before the CACT, and that's it's Parker and Kent. It's really Parker is the issue, but Kent and the way that their houses, one's a cul-de-sac on one side, and there's another like 7 houses or so on the other. They're very much involved in the traffic calming case. So that's going to happen next month. The process has already begun. The letter's going to be sent out, any day now by staff, and that's going to occur. So we'll see how that plays out. Those are very difficult to move forward because of the high thresholds of participation required.
it's something like 75%, isn't it?
It was. It's
Yeah.
been changed in the last year and a half to 67%.
Okay.
Because the threshold was believed to be too high, but still quite high, 67. You have to get 25% at the meeting next month, and then a passage vote of 67%, and we determine the area, and it's 44 houses, I believe, so you need a lot of votes to get this passed. That's it.
Thank you. Any other reports from the commissioners? Okay. Are there any petitions from those in the audience on issues not on the agenda?
I have none.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we'll move on to the planning director's report, which is going to be, we probably should have said in the adoption of the agenda that we were going to move that, but I'll just move it to later when Mr. Snyder's finished with his meeting downstairs. Under old business, the capital improvements program for fiscal year 2014 to 2018. Tonight we're going to hold a public hearing and make recommendations to the City Council. Ms. Mester is our staff person.
Good evening, Chair Rogers and Planning Commission. I'm pleased to be back here for the third and final public hearing if the commissioners so desire to take action this evening. I'll do a brief synopsis of where we've been and what we've done today for the public and the public record, and then I will note in your memo attachment 3 is sample motions for your consideration. Staff recommendation is to approve as presented to you on January 22nd. There's a spot there if you wish to make modifications, and also a denial motion if you wish to deny and not recommend the CIP. Both the second motions require specification from the Planning Commission for modifications or reasons for denial. But the CIP was presented to the Planning Commission on January 22nd. All materials provided to you at that time and at subsequent work sessions have also been posted to the city's website under the CIP page. The CIP process is a very important piece because it sets the tone for projects and infrastructure improvements that are consistent with the comprehensive plan and also comply with financial policies, which per the city's charter is a purview of the Planning Commission to take action, and the memo tonight outlines those code sections. The CIP useful life is now for 5 years. In past years, it was 1 year, and we were getting items that really weren't of infrastructure and long-term things that you would capitalize. And the cost is now at $150,000 threshold. The process, as I mentioned, kicked off on January 22nd. You then held work sessions on the 4th and the 11th, in which, by splitting up the topics, you covered 4 each time in every single project. And as we know, I think we hit about a 3-hour mark at the last work session. So I do appreciate the Planning Commission's time and attention to the details of the projects, meeting with the staff and knowing what the benefits and the implications are for the community. Then this evening would be your final public hearing. The CIP is both general fund and utility funds. The general fund gets the most focus, I think, because it is not an enterprise fund that's self-sustaining and self-funded by the fees of water and sewer. But the general fund, of course, is very important because it's paid for by local tax dollars. The water fund is different this year, as we discussed in work session, because there's no projects for FY14 pending the resolution of the sale of the system. There are significant needs for the sewer system that will remain and continue to be a focus of public works if the sale goes through, because that part of the utility stays with the city. The general fund CIP includes both school and general government, fields, facilities, and then, of course, has our stormwater transportation projects, Rex and Park. The 5-year CIP does show $150 million. A large part of that, as we know, is for the high school and the Mary Ellen Henderson wing. And so if you take those out that need to be sorted out through funding sources and boundary line adjustments and the bringing in of land to the city, the CIP really is funding and looking at $34 million. Now, that's a lot smaller than the $150 million, but the $34 million is very critical to the infrastructure of the city. I think the CIP is finally gaining traction and ground to get back to where we were in the 2009 timeframe when we started cutting out wholeheartedly $4.5 million, as you remember that painful discussion and process to defund projects. And that is built upon the financial policies where council is budgeting each year money for pay-as-you-go, money for debt service, and starting to build the capital reserve fund. The memo that you have before you this evening pulls out the summary pages of 3.1 through 3.4 that was in your full CIP notebook, just so they were readily accessible to the commissioners and the public. And then I also have it available on the screen if we need to make any modifications. Up until this evening, I have received no comments or requests for the commissioners to change anything that have been presented since the last work session. And so now I stand ready for any comments, questions, and further dialogue that you wish to have on the CIP this evening.
Thank you. Thank you. You've done a great job of putting together all the presentations and getting us all this information. Do any of, I'd kind of like to go through all of the different categories and see where we have questions. And we've had briefings from each of these groups, so, and we had time to ask questions at the time. So I feel as though we're well educated on all of the requests for funding. So if you have a question on information technology, now would be the time to ask your final questions. Yes?
Regarding the information technology, I saw that you had moved it out pending further analysis. Is there a reason why that was taken out? Regarding the public safety radios and
Yeah, the
PSAP center.
The general government one that's in there for the 507,000 was there last year, so that remained constant. The radios and the PSAP center were not recommended for funding this year because we need to do some additional study with the new chief, and we're still working through the Arlington Fire Services contract as well as the radios and the 911. And so we felt it was important to raise the issue so the community was aware of it, but it wasn't ready for funding consideration.
And the department is okay with that?
Yes, I had reviewed it thoroughly with Chief Gavin prior to it being presented to you all on the 22nd.
She made such a persuasive argument. Any further questions on that? Let's move on to public safety. This is our fire station and the engines and ladder truck. Any questions about those and how the money is allocated?
And if I may, Chair, I do want to call your attention that Chief Schomburg is in the audience as well as one of our other volunteers. And so if there's anything more technical that I'm not aware of, they'll be available to answer your questions.
Any questions on that?
I just have one comment that actually yesterday I got firsthand experience with our ladder truck. There's a fire in the house next door to mine, and actually we had ladder trucks from Fairfax County and Arlington County, and I can tell you they are much nicer than our ladder truck, although
Well, not if this goes through.
although all three were used in the fire and everyone did a great job, but you could definitely see just seeing them there that ours is definitely a little bit older than what is rolling around in the other neighboring jurisdictions. So to me, it seems like a reasonable investment to make in the department.
And if I may take a moment, since I said this to Andy downstairs, but one needs to be very appreciative of a good, responsive neighbor that sees it, goes knocking on the doors, waking up, and making sure 911 was called, because in talking with Chief Gavin this morning, and I'm sure Paul could attest, property damage, yes, but nobody was injured in terms of persons or animals in that house. So thank you also for being a good citizen.
Well, at least we don't have to commend you as a hero for rescuing people. That's good. Okay, so we'll move from there. Exactly.
Please fix the windows.
Don't ever want to hear those darn windows ever again.
Okay.
Anything gets cut, pray it's not the window.
Yeah, because we're done with that.
Okay, I'm going to move down to the environment. Any questions on the stormwater facility reinvestment and equipment?
Nope.
Transportation. Okay, Russ, do you have anything on transportation?
No, I don't really. I mean, on that CACT meeting, I actually brought up this $150,000 to see, since I'm very anxious to see the improvements happen to the WNOD trail. And honestly, they're just not ready for it. So they were very happy with where it was. There's some money potentially from the WNOD trail that they want to see if they can access before getting this $150,000. So that's in the right place. And I've talked with those members.
Well, that's
I did have a quick question about just the bridge replacement. The local match portion does not come to $150,000. Is it just like when that guideline, is that a cumulative?
You would look at the project in its entirety, and so I don't separate it out by funding source. So you would look at the full 80,000 plus the 960,000, and that's what exceeds the 150,000.
Anything else on transportation?
Yeah.
Okay. Lindy?
Something that occurred to me downstairs while reading all this stuff about the Rushmark development. Should we be looking at any offer of monies for any of the traffic signal management stuff? I know this is kind of a little bit, this is different because this is the thing that's going to be in-house, but I mean, as far as they did mention the changing of traffic light at timing and stuff like that. And, you know, I was thinking also about that traffic light that's going to be down at the end of South Maple and in Washington. I mean, should we be looking at anything along the way?
For the traffic signal management in particular, that's fully grant funded, and so we don't need additional funds for that. The South Maple and the ones along Washington are funded with federal money, VDOT, or is currently proposed with the other redevelopment project there, Reserve at Tenor Hill, to cover the traffic signal at Tenor Hill in Washington. For this particular project, I think that's worthy of raising, and I'll mention it to Mr. Schneider. I don't know the specifics. I know he and Mr. Fuller have been looking at signals and what the developer would need to do around Washington and Annandale. But for any specific CIP projects before you tonight, we don't need money, but there may be enhancements from that project that should be considered.
And would we need anything thrown in for the multimodal?
At this point, it's too early to say that we would need it because we haven't done cost estimates, but I think the one initial question that you raised about big chimneys and things around residential for traffic calming, there's probably enough already that needs to be addressed
But
right around
Put it in the
there.
back of your mind.
I will
Because
certainly
it
mention
come-
it.
Occurred to me when I was reading all this stuff.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it certainly should be considered.
Always looking for money.
Okay. Recreation and parks and fields. Anyone have questions on these or comments?
No.
Just, if I might. Since I did mention, I know this has nothing to do with this, but I hope that the Parks has an idea of how much, needs to be done with that master plan for Big Chimneys. I hope that can be worked out.
Yeah, I do believe the director is in contact with Mr. Schneider on that project.
Okay. I think the water and sewage utility funds is a given. So we'll move back to public facilities, since we've had some extensive briefings on that, and I will listen to comments or questions on this particular area. Okay, Melissa?
Cindy, the $500,000 that's in FY 2015 for George Mason, which is really, I guess, plan-in money. So right now, we have it in there as grant revenue offset. I'm just wondering, should that not be debt funded? I mean, we really do need to do that plan, and it's kind of, as long as it's not money that we know for sure that we can get, it's kind of iffy if we can do that plan at that point. And we're also wondering if we shouldn't be doing that in 2014, because if we are considering spending that type of money in 2016, I don't see how we can plan for a new high school in 1 year prior to where we have that money.
Well, there's a couple points. As you know, from the superintendent's presentation, they had asked for the money in FY14. This money needs to be A&E money, not study money. Study money is not a capital project, and it would need to be in the operating budget. So let me come back to timing and some of the study stuff that I agree and would need to happen prior to that. But this should be architectural and engineering in the next stage for the school. Obviously, we need to do some concept planning and some feasibility study for that 42 acres when it comes, well, it's 39 because the other parts of the property are. The 39 acres comes into the city if the boundary line adjustment's approved, because there is the allowable 30% that could be redeveloped, so we can sell that land and redevelop it. So before you can design the high school, we need to know what that 11 acres is going to be that has the potential to be sold and redeveloped, which makes the funding much more feasible to pay the debt service on a high school. You have the sale of the land and hopefully ongoing tax revenue from a mixed-use project similar to the discussion you just had downstairs. So in working with the city manager, and I know he's mentioned this to the superintendent, we feel that there'll need to be some local funding in the operating budget that the city and the schools jointly do together to do a concept plan up there. Where's the best place to redo the high school, on-site or a different corner? Where do you move the football field? Still need the land on top of a parking? How do you improve the parking for the middle school while adding a wing to the middle school, because you're not going to move Mary Ellen Henderson? So we need to do that jointly. And so that study, though, is not what we would put into the CIP anymore because of accounting changes. You all have known, you've seen PED plan studies and watershed management studies. We're just not doing that anymore because of accounting rules. So I think what will need to happen as the FY14 budget is developed, or excess revenue becomes available in FY13, our current year, if revenue projections still stay high, is to dedicate some of that money to do the concept planning. That would then tee us up to be ready to do A&E money for the schools. Once that's firmed up, it may be that that indeed stays as debt service and we take it out of green and it just becomes debt funded, or some other sources, depending on the timing of sale of land and all that wonderful stuff. But some of the timing for why I put this in FY15 and not 14, is that the referendum, as we know, is in November of this year. Then you need a city and county formal action to do the boundary line adjustments before you even have city control over this land in order for us to sell, and that is a term of the sale of the water system. That, in our projections of a realistic timeline, is probably March or April. By then, I'm back before you talking about the CIP again for FY15, and we'll be much more firm as to sort of what's happening in the timeline. Clearly, the schools desire to move as soon as possible. I just believe there's some steps that need to happen so we know what we're planning for.
And I recognize that. I guess my feeling is that the A&E part is going to take a bit of time with the amount of public hearings that would probably have to be involved in any kind of final design, final architecture. And so you just look at the time and you think they're going to need more time than that to be able to start building anything in FY16.
Yeah, and also, if
Well,
you
can I
look
ask
in-
just a quick, because I think this is, I don't understand the line between the concept plan and the A&E. Does that make sense? So to Melissa's point, when it would almost seem to me that you have to start engineering the site in advance of a concept plan.
The concept plan that I was referring to, and I think where I was hoping to answer yours will hopefully cover both, is first we need to know the concept plan of how we're going to use all 39 acres. What part stays our transfer site for the mulch and the snow? What part is where the buses park? Where do we move around Mary Ellen Henderson and add a wing? And then where do we put the high school and a football field while selling off 11 acres for a mixed-use redevelopment? Does that mixed-use redevelopment go at Haycock and 7, or does it go where the football field is because it's close to West Falls Church Metro? Those are two sort of big macro options. So I think you need to do that concept planning that's both a city and a school concept. You kind of know where we're going to start trying to sell off and redevelop those 11 acres, because remember, the rest of the land, besides those 30% or 11 acres, has to stay school facility for 50 years as part of the settlement. Once you know where the school's going to go, then it moves from that broad land use concept plan to the concept plan and the designing of the school, which clearly is going to take some time and public input. But I think you need to know, are you at the corner of 7 and Haycock with good elevation, and you go 4 stories up, and that's where you're doing your architectural designing and engineering, or are you back by West Falls Church Metro, which is pretty flat, and different architectural and design implications. I mean, I know you were on the feasibility, whatever our task force was, LEAF and every other name we've called it, Leapfrog at one point. Many different options on how you could either keep part of that school and just tear parts of it down, tear it totally down and redevelop, and where you're going to put it would make a big difference on that design. So that's sort of the thinking, and it certainly is an evolution. It starts from one and needs to move quickly in there given the enrollment projections and the condition of the school.
If I may, just to talk about a little bit about what you talked about. you can't really move from directly to an AE plan. You have to start with a conceptual plan on a site before you do that. And because I have a little bit of expertise on it, I now understand the process by which this money is being put into the next year and not into this year's funding. Because you really do have to establish where your school is going to go before you can even give the concept plan to an architect or a civil engineer to be able to start doing the engineering on the project itself. So if the money is already allocated in operating fund, you said? Is it?
That's where it needs to be.
Well, not this
It-
500, but the conceptual plan, the money for conceptual plan is already allocated, right?
It is not allocated yet. The city manager is working with the superintendent and council, because it probably, from a timing perspective, should be in his FY14 budget that he's about to propose, which comes out March 11th and incorporates your all CIP. The challenge is that there's budget guidance that can only limit the operating budget on the city side by 3.2%, and the school board's request is 15%, so we're already struggling, so it'll have to be prioritized. So your all's discussion tonight and anything that you recommend me to message back, I will do, because 14 budget is pretty tight, but in order to move forward on all this, you need that study money. The other option that could happen, which is pretty reasonable that it could happen, is we have excess revenue this year because the revenues are higher than projected, and then council could dedicate that money, 200 or 300,000 to a study.
So maybe I don't think I articulated my question well at all. It's not clear to me, and maybe it's completely clear to you, but it's not clear to me in this budget request whether it's 11 acres or the details of it. I don't think we need to get into. It's not really clear to me what solves the school enrollment problem. Whether maybe we don't have 11 acres to sell, and I don't see. So if you have plenty of money to figure that out, one of my challenges when we did the CIP last year is I didn't really see where these buildings were going. If you're expanding, I mean, I'm taking it at face value, and I am still skeptical, but I let go and let God on this, that Mount Daniel can be expanded as much as everybody says, and the neighbors really think we're great and love us. And I was at one of those public hearings, and I don't know how they had such a dramatic turnaround, but if they did, I believe you. So it's just not clear where these buildings are going and what's being done. So perhaps we don't need A&E money, but it's surprising to me we don't need front-loaded study money on these buildings.
I would say that you do need front-loaded operating money to do the concept plans for the land that we're about to do a boundary line adjustment. So not Mount Daniel, but for where what we're going to do with the high school and the Mary Ellen Henderson. Mary Ellen and Henderson, there's limited areas on where you're going to put that new wing and the 10 classrooms, but everything else you're going to do there has to take that into consideration, from parking, traffic flow, where the new high school is. You could tear down and rebuild the high school in its similar location, much smaller footprint, because that thing sprawls, and improve the parking and a gym, and probably put a football field on something and go 4 stories because of the elevation. That's one option. But if you look at the materials that we provided with the map of the land that could be the boundary line adjustment, you also could tear down the high school and let that be your redevelopment area right on the commercial corridor, which is pretty consistent with past area planning for that, and that is one of the opportunity areas you all will be revisiting. And then put the high school in the back of the property, or, so I think
Well, so it would
that's
seem
where
to
we
me.
do need money to design that, but it's an operating budget, not a capital budget.
Okay, so you're on top of the timing, and so my question as it relates, for example, to the Cherry Street property, have we looked at whether Cherry Street is the right fix in the PK situation, and whether that campus isn't better put up at the George Mason, Mary Ellen Henderson?
I know the superintendent of the school board has been looking at that quite intensely, and I think they're satisfied with Cherry Street there. The question is more Mount Daniel. They have currently, as submitted to you, kept Mount Daniel at its current location with an expansion. It cannot.
Well, but let me, hold on, so this is what's confusing me, and I'm sorry to take so much time, but I just don't understand this, though. So you're moving, you have to do Cherry Street because you have to move the trailers from Mount Daniel, so you're going to a less than ideal location and adding another campus, which seems inefficient, so that you can expand Mount Daniel, but you may not be able to expand Mount Daniel as much as you think you can, and there is no, seems to be no other alternative for considering Cherry Street. I just don't, it feels like we've gotten, it feels like we don't really have a plan. Everything is sort of a reaction to it.
The Mount Daniel, from the studies done by the school's consultants, has looked at the county zoning, and they can expand to what's proposed here and adding those 8 classrooms and adjusting the cafeteria and the gym. So that's per code. There is the public process, because that will remain in Fairfax County, so it's a site plan amendment. From the calls that the city manager is getting, and I know the superintendent and one of the homeowners association today, there do seem to be a lot more support for a school expansion than a sale of the land and doing other increased residential redevelopment up there. So I think there is a potential for a community shift. But we also committed to the homeowner association to have some meetings with them. You know, with doing the concept plan analysis with our land up there, since 70% of it has to stay school, one could consider how many schools could you get up there, and could you get an elementary school up there? That starts being pretty tight, and a lot of intensity of an elementary school right on a main highway. To date, it's not been the school board's direction or what they formally transmitted to you.
No, I
to
wasn't
consider.
suggesting that an elementary school. I'm suggesting that an 8,000 square foot building, which is costing the city $2.4 million, that's a very nice facility up at the George Mason High School campus.
Well,
I'm
It makes as much sense as putting it on Cherry Street away from all the other schools. And
Well, the problem is that we need the I know you'll say this is reactionary, but we need the preschool space like now. So if we were going to put it up at the high school, we're talking 4, 5, 6 years from now before that could happen. I don't see what you're going to do with the preschool in the
Well, we have a preschool now.
yeah,
but
next
the
year it's going to
preschool-
be in the most likely be in the trailers at TJ.
Well, but the preschool can't stay because of an expansion, partly of Mount Daniel.
Well, next year the preschool might not be able to stay because of the population of Mount Daniel in the existing structure. So the trailer that the
Sure.
preschool is in now will be used by kindergartners.
Well,
So
if
next year
you're-
it might have nothing to do with the expansion of Mount Daniel.
but I think what I'm just trying to get an understanding of is not necessarily this emergency, what happens next school year, but as we're, conceptually, maybe I was really hoping we'd go through the CIP. I've been sort of heavily lobbied, I guess, on this, and my comment today was, I was hoping we would go through the CIP, and I would have sort of this understanding that really maybe we did, holy cow, have to spend $100 million or $70 million. I feel no smarter after having read this stuff and sat through this stuff. I feel like I got nothing. I don't know whether that's really the number. I mean, I got this sort of, oh my God, it's an emergency. We have to spend $2.4 million, which, by the way, used to be $800,000 and then became $1.4 million and then became $2 million and now is $2.4 million because, oh heck, we're having this terrible emergency. I just don't feel like that's our role to have emergencies. I mean, we're the planning commission and we're supposed to be looking out into the future. So we know where we would really be with perhaps a $30 million school, perhaps a $50 million school, I don't know. And so I'm no smarter on that. And so that's my challenge on this.
I'd like to just comment. I think I agree with Rob on this because I also feel as if the whole school planning is a little bit murky. there's no real comprehensive plan that I've seen that, shows me what we're doing towards the future. I mean, we have, I've had people tell me, well, this school is going to be full within this year. I've had, but you don't really see a comprehensive plan going into the future as to how we're going to address all of these needs. I'm also surprised at the $2.4 million, to be honest with you, because I think the structure that's existing could be renovated for less. I mean, there were people in there, that were using the structure about a year ago, right? A year or two ago.
Now,
It's,
Now, people that are still, it's still being used, so.
it's
if this is-
currently being used now.
So-
They have gotten cost estimates from the firm doing the TJ project. And so this is truer costs than the previous planning numbers. It does basically gut the building down except for like 2-3 walls and redoes it with elevator, stairs, ADA, and classrooms and major kitchen reconfiguration, and it adds classrooms. So it is more than just a rehab for sure in terms of the dollar amounts in their planning. The superintendent with the school board, since she's come to the city the last 2 years, has really revisited, relooked at the studies that had been done previously to start getting it into a comprehensive long-range planning. But I think they find themselves when looking at the enrollment numbers with not having had the plan. Now it's an issue. Now we're requesting money because we need to take care of it now. And we're continuing to work with them, and in the general plan notebook that I'd given you that's separate is starting our 20-year planning process, because clearly, all of these facilities you can't do, and it's 27 if you count general government and schools, in a 5-year period. We can't afford it, we can't plan it, we're not going to sustain it, and we'll repeat ourselves in 20 years. So my hope is that we'll start getting the core stuff taken care of, but then have capital reserves, have planning, and not be repeating this situation.
I guess the question that I'll have as a follow-up is, if, for example, we spend this money to renovate this building, how long are we going to keep using the building? Or are we going to, after we've done the comprehensive plan, say, no, we need to move them out of that building, put them back somewhere else? Is there any sort of guarantee that says, because, when you spend $2.4 million, you're looking at maybe 5 years to 10 years with it in a building?
Yeah, I was looking up the Mount Daniel capacity projections because I calculate in Cherry Street. It looks like out into the 2019-20 period that they are not going to have enrollment pressures at Mount Daniel combining Cherry Street. Now, the Cherry Street pre-K and special pop students are mandatory, and so, all the students, they knock on your door, you have to serve them, but if they're special ed, you have certain standards and requirements, which is what's also triggering the gut and redo. So I do believe they think that it helps them address it for a longer period of time, but I don't know that it's more than a 10-year period. At the current enrollment, they're going to have constant pressures in all the schools, given the flux.
Thank you.
Melissa?
I've just always felt all along that the renovation of Cherry Street is a mistake. It's a lot of money to retrofit a building that's isolated from all the other campuses, which I don't think is really a great thing from a service point of view. But mostly, when we first started talking about Cherry Street, we weren't really talking about doing a Mount Daniel expansion, mostly because when we did the last one, we had promised Fairfax County that we wouldn't do another one. And so now we're back and we're looking at a Mount Daniel expansion. And it just seems to me if we're going to spend that amount of money, that should be rolled into Mount Daniel's expansion to make it much bigger. Because we've talked about now doing an expansion that will be strong enough that we could build another story on it later. Well, why should we just build the story now? And make Mount Daniel as big as we need to make it for the preschool to be there. I understand that we're talking about some temporary shifts around of the preschool now, But if we can temporarily shift it to TJ, then we can temporarily shift it to TJ till Mount Daniel's rebuilt. It's really not, I don't know if that's going to make that much of an effect if they're in trailers now and they're in other trailers, other than I'm sure it would be better for age groups to be together. But I don't know, my feeling is that 2.4 million should really be rolled into Mount Daniel, and we should do a bigger expansion. All our expansions are always piecemeal, and they never last long enough. Absolutely. And I'm really tired of my youngest child was in Mount Daniel when the new wing opened. She was in one of the new classrooms, which were very, very nice. And 6 months into her kindergarten year, like 6 months after they were occupied, we were in a parents' meeting with Mrs. Lako, the principal, and she says to us, we're already full. That facility was barely built where the principal already said we were full and we had problems. And so it really is an issue. We're obviously not, when we do these small little piecemeal additions, we're not doing enough. And then we have to go back there and build again and put our kids and our teachers through the construction again because we're just not doing the right thing. And if you go to all of our schools, except for MEH, they all have weird ramps in them. And those weird ramps are because we do weird additions that don't work right. And I'm just really tired of it. I'd much rather see the Cherry Street money be rolled into Mount Daniel and do an addition that can actually last us. I'd be happy for 10 years. Because the last one lasted us 6 months before the school felt that they didn't have enough room. So, anyway. No, exactly. Here we are. And my understanding, I keep hearing from school board members, is that the reason we do these little tiny pieces is they don't want to go to referendum. But our city supports our schools. We should do a real plan for what we really need and go to referendum because I believe the citizens will support it. And I think that this piecemeal approach is just wrong. And it's bad planning. And, you know, I've been also told that we let this stay in there last year. Well, I didn't want it to stay in last year, but I keep being told there's no other plans, and I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of Cherry Street, and I just can't support it anymore. It's not a good plan. And if we're going to build at Mount Daniel again, go through the public process again, we should build a substantial addition. We shouldn't build for a second story, we should build the second story.
If I may, Chair, I just wanted to comment on the voter referendum piece since it was just mentioned, and I hadn't brought it forward this year because none of the projects would have triggered that. But Council had adopted in 1996 a bond referendum, and it's also incorporated in their financial policies, which you do have in tab 2 of your book, an excerpt of the resolution. But it basically, and it was built on 1988 one, so this has been a long time history, but in 1996 they exempted that it didn't apply for water, sewer, fire, police, or medical services, sort of those emergency medical public safety things. But other than that, if the aggregate amount of the bond for the bonded project or portion of exceeds 10% of our general fund budget for the fiscal year in which the bonds are being anticipated to be issued, you have to do a bond referendum. So in general, our budget is in the 68 to 69 $million budget a year. So 10% of that you could, figure if you're a 6.9 or a $7 million project, it's going to require a bond referendum. And so Mount Daniel is currently a $6 million project, and we may or may not issue it all in 1 year, but if you added the 2.4, you're almost generally going to trigger bond referendum. That doesn't mean not to do it, it's just another threshold, and generally those are with general elections, and so they would be the November election, which generally follows a CIP adoption, so one could plan for that.
Thanks for that, because actually I had several people say they didn't know where the referendum language was, so it's good to know it's actually from a 1996 resolution.
Yep, and I can quickly tell you what page it is in your tab 2, I believe. But if you want to go, I'll find the page if you want to continue on.
well, anyway, regardless, I recognize that it would trigger a referendum, but, I think this game where we try to keep everything under a referendum because it's more difficult, it's just not the best way for planning, because we have this artificial threshold that that's determining how we develop our schools, because we don't want to go to referendum, and I would rather see us plan what we really need, be honest, go to referendum, and let the citizens support it, because I believe they would.
Madam Chair? Yes. I so agree with Melissa. And what you said just a couple sentences ago was that, well, we kept it in last year. Well, this thing came in last year after a lot of things had come in. And then it was presented to us that, with a much less amount of renovations, and nobody had stepped inside of it to do a study yet. And so I just see the Cherry Street thing going very, very, getting out of hand. And having lived through many, multiple renovations of our schools, which I hope I never see another renovation in my life, only to my house. But seriously, we don't have a good plan here, and I'm sorry that the school representatives are not here tonight, because I honestly think that this might be something that we pull out or keep aside or something, or don't recommend the CIP until we sit down there and grind this out, because I really don't like the way things are moving along. And this piecemeal Band-Aid thing, and then we back down on material quality and everything, and we don't get the quality work that we should be getting. And I think that even on the TJ edition that we're doing now, the QSCAB was $3,000, wasn't it? And then what money was added to it? What was the total cost of the Mount Daniel renovation? I mean, the TJ?
The phase one was 4.9, and the second one was 4 million. So it was split over the 2 fiscal years, so it didn't trigger the voter referendum in order to get the federal funding at 0%.
Right, because we had to put that up front, which is fine, but this 2.4 million for practically tearing down the place and rebuilding it was not what was presented at all last year.
Final one adopted was 2 million last year, and that was after you were in the middle of the work session.
Right.
They had some preliminary walkthrough, and they had the pictures for you all, and then since last year, they refined the project. There is, as Mr. Rakin indicated, current constraints on the service that can be done at the current trailers. They're not doing full days because they got to split the shifts, and they can't do as much peer students as they would like for the integration and the educational component. And so this would allow them to correct that and have a couple extra classrooms right now for growth compared to what students they have now. It would be a nice facility at the end of the time that if a larger expansion was done, there could be another use for it, but it is a financial commitment now that we will be bonding and paying off for 20 years. So it's a serious consideration. And certainly, you all can make your recommendation tonight, with or without it revised. March 11th, I need to have it in order for it to be in the city manager's CIP, so there's not a whole lot of room unless you call a special meeting. There obviously will be continuing dialogue with the council as they go through the CIP, and we usually have a joint work session for the new planning commission members where you present to council the issues and your rationale for what was adopted. So this isn't the end of it, but it would certainly signal an important message one way or the other.
Well, educationally wise, I certainly understand the need, and absolutely, that is totally very important part of it, but I don't see the whole planning situation going together with the schools, and just really it's bothersome to me.
So, I'm relatively new here to the Planning Commission, so I haven't been exposed to how we got to where we are today. I did attend all of the Cherry Street task force meetings when it first came up and saw it evolve from hey, maybe we could just get in there for not too much money to where it is now. So I'm familiar with that side. I will say, I mean, one of the things that Dr. Jones mentioned was, and it's not on the CIP yet, because I guess it's beyond the 5-year range, is that the next step, you know, we talk about not wanting to keep adding on, is to actually, after this Mount Daniel expansion, do another one that allows us to bring second grade from Thomas Jefferson to Mount Daniel, so that Thomas Jefferson can survive, since it will be full once the current addition is done. So I don't know, I can't speak for the school board, but if there is support from here to do a much bigger Mount Daniel addition now, more than the $6 million, but you know, significantly more, to get second grade over there in the next couple of years, I suspect the school board would be willing to try to hash that out. But to me, unless you're going to do that, the notion of delaying Cherry Street because you're going to make this next edition of Mount Daniel a little bit bigger to handle the preschool, why not go all the way and get second grade in there now as well? And maybe the school board would be, and the superintendent would be into that if we're willing to sign up for it now. I mean, to me, it's not going to be any cheaper. If anything, it's going to be more expensive, but hopefully it would get to the point where we do less additions every couple of years.
Well, I think my hope would be that by doing, you know, just like with your house or with anything, you know, 10 little additions are always significantly more expensive than one big one. And so my hope would be that there would be some cost savings. And if the number is 8 million, I'm in favor of that. I mean, that could be okay. I love the schools. I don't want anyone to think I don't love the schools, but I don't know. I think there's a parallel on cost savings, though, by the way, which, you know, you persevered for 5+ years with the city hall and the other thing that's in here. And I mean, you know, there was a lot of pushback, and is this the most efficient way? And I think we came up with a plan, to your credit. I mean, I think you can, because I know you mostly worked on this.
Pencil and eraser.
You know, to your credit, I mean, this actually ends up being a pretty good solution to this. And you know, it took probably more years than you ever hoped that it would, but I think
I
we
like
came.
long-range master planning.
I mean, I think it was sort of a good thing. I don't feel like we have that for the schools. I remember 2 years ago having this discussion and like feel like we're kind of in the same place. So there you go.
Okay, Russ, you haven't said anything. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, my comment is I do support the Cherry Street renovations. I do have a child who is I have 2 children at Mount Daniel, and one actually in the preschool who is in those trailers as part of the half-day program as opposed to a full day. So I certainly have personal experience about the tremendous crowding over at that school. A lot of the demographic projections I'm very leery about sort of going forward, and on our high school, and this $99 million I feel is just a make-believe number. But on the preschool level, I have seen it. I've attended, you know, the meetings. I've gone to the open houses. They have a real and immediate problem. And to me, 2.4 million is not this like outrageous number that I'm hearing is giving people sticker shock. It's more than what we've seen, no doubt. But it's not 2.4 that's going to last 1 year. It'll last longer than that, and it's a facility that I think, you know, if it's replaced by a bigger and broader expansion to Mount Daniel, would fully support, again, sort of dovetailing with what Rob said. If it's $8 million and that goes to referendum, fully support it. But I don't feel like that's wasted 2.4 million, because there is real capacity issues. You really do have to move these students in some way, and you're going to spend some major portion of that just relocating. I don't think it's a great plan. I really don't even support it in the sense that having an additional campus, I don't think the planning is there. But in a short-term crisis that really does exist in Mount Daniel, I think this is a fine solution. And then I would hope that on a larger Mount Daniel expansion, that it be well thought out, and we don't do it, you know, in piecemeal fashion. And the planning happens as well on the high school side, where that when we're dealing with this immediate crisis, I think you have some time to deal with the demographics as they shift forward. And this number doesn't, you know, blow me away. both in the cost of construction and what the building could be for a longer period of time. So I think this does make sense in fiscal year 2014, and I would support, as we go forward, bigger projects that require referendums and longer-term planning that has not, as we've all mentioned, really happened to date.
I have a question, just an information, personal information. I'm not as involved with the schools as the rest of you, since my sons are well out of them. But I'm curious to know about the pre-K that is currently at Mount Daniel in the trailers. How old are these kids?
Do you want to,
They can start as early as age 3.
As 3. And it's important for 3 and 4-year-olds to have full days of school
Well-
as opposed to half day? I don't get this.
Well, first of all, they attend through age 5 or 6 till they go to kindergarten, which is.
Well, I know kindergarten.
And, but the professionals have told us that at the special ed teachers and the administrators, that they would prefer a full-day program, but they can't support it because they don't have the space, so they split them into things. So
That just shows you how old I am.
Yeah.
With 3 and 4-year-olds seems to be, it's too much for a full day.
But Ruth, maybe, I don't know if you know that this is the pre-K program over there is children with both regular ed and special needs children who are educated. And the sooner you can get them, anybody with special needs, into a full-day program, the better outlook on every
because
single
it's not,
thing.
and it's not just preschool. I mean, they receive physical therapy,
You're right,
occupational
right.
therapy.
It's
see.
much
Okay.
more than
All right, well,
a
that's-
kindergarten aspect or a nursery school
Yeah.
aspect. It's a very valuable, necessary start to their whole life.
Okay, I'm not questioning the program, I'm just
But
asking.
yeah, it's
And
a
then the other
different
thing- It's not
program
my
than you've
experience.
probably
And the
ever
other thing
heard.
that they
yeah.
have is the family literacy or whatever it's called, where they take these ESL students, and early on they teach them English. And I don't know the details, but I've been told that obviously the cost savings of that down the road to the schools
Right.
is significant, because you have these kids that now are English speakers and able to get through the regular programs, whereas if they didn't have that, they're entering kindergarten without those skills, and it's just that much more, you have to have more teachers helping them. So I think, in that sense, they're really limited with that in the current at Mount Daniel, and that is sort of, going to be expensive down the road. So it's and I will say, I mean, I can talk about how my kid goes to school in a trailer. I mean, the trailer is very nice, and most days, if the weather's nice, being in the trailer is really not a big deal. But if there's bad weather, or if there's an event, I mean, it's the disconnect from the school, it's just a hassle. And I have reservations with the Cherry Street approach, because, separate campus aside, my daughter anyways benefited from being exposed to the kids, and I always say that anyone that's in 3rd grade now or younger has met my daughter in school at Mount Daniel, and so it, I think, helps everybody accept these special needs kids going forward. So I'm not a huge fan of the Cherry Street project in that sense. I will say, if we do Cherry Street and a few years down the road we do this Mount Daniel thing, we could bring them back. I mean, Cherry Street doesn't become then useless. I mean, it could be valuable as a private enterprise for childcare. I mean, that's in huge demand around here. I think the city could recover somewhat, if not all of its investment in that building. And while it is currently in use, it's not in great shape. And I think a renovation for our school use, and then for future public use of that, or private use, if that becomes an option, I think it'd be decent return on investment there anyway. So it's not like you're throwing $2.4 million down the tubes.
Well, I was with you when it was $1 million-ish. I mean, it seemed like a very good short-term fix, and it was a clear return on investment. I mean, it's more than that, and there is, and for me, I have sort of obviously said that 2.4 is that limit, but like there is this limit to how much we're going to start spending. I mean, you cross some line when that extra $1 million reinvested at Mount Daniel is money better spent. I think that's my challenge with this. So yeah.
Okay, has everyone had their chance to speak? Okay.
Yeah, and I've got something.
And then-
You go.
So, what do we do to get a comprehensive plan from the school board with regard to the city? So, and this may be a naive question because I'm new on it. And then, what powers do we have as planning commissioners to demand such a comprehensive plan from the city?
The Planning Commission is charged with looking at the capital project and looking at its comprehensive plan and its financial feasibility. So certainly, long-range planning is a critical piece of it. You're not adopting the budget which council does and puts in requirements in their ordinance. I mean, they required a general government master plan before I could spend money on this facility, and started the foundation of an integrated master plan, because it shouldn't be schools and it shouldn't be general government, it should be all of our facilities. To what the Planning Commission could specifically do, I think you have a couple options before you. You could make a motion and label your intent, which will not be enforceable per se. I mean, you can't restrict issuing of bonds, but you could clearly make your intent known. You could not fund the Cherry Street project and say, because there's no master plan or it's short-term or whatever your conditions and concerns might be. Or you could take that Cherry Street money and put it into Mount Daniel. From a financial standpoint, if you stay within the same dollar amounts and just change what project they're in, it's not going to change the financial feasibility of this that's presented before you. So I guess you kind of have some options, and you are formally recommending to the council through the city manager's budget when he rolls it in, where you think the investment should be. Clearly then post that, the school board and the public could comment on the CIP when it goes through its next review process with council.
Thank you, Cindy.
Along the same lines, I kind of feel like, as a planning commission, we've been put in a very strange situation. We are responsible for planning within the city, but then you have the school board and the schools, and since they don't have their own funding capabilities, we get kind of caught in that. But I don't think we have enough information from the schools as far as their long-range planning, and perhaps just even sitting down and talking. I keep spinning things around in my head with, about possibilities of even, keeping for one more year the 8th grade up there at the high school and shifting around and shifting some of the 1st grade over to keep the 5th grade. I'm playing chess pieces, and and just even the possibility of just sitting down and talking with everybody and talking and not getting yelled at. I would appreciate that. But because I think this is a very sensitive subject all the way around. But I do think that we've got to do some work together and some long-range stuff. There's so much on the plate right now that we didn't have last year. The big thing is the water system. The big thing is gaining control over there. Another big thing is the fact that now the neighborhood up at Mount Daniel kind of like the school and don't want any residential. And so we've got a lot of shifting sand here. And the other thing is we don't have any recording of all this here tonight.
Yes,
Yes,
we
you
do.
Do we?
Oh, yeah.
You were
Oh,
using
do
the
we?
new
Oh, good.
digital remote
Good,
cameras.
hello, I'm glad. Not having the camera staring me right in the face.
You've been on the whole time.
Well, good. I am so glad. Thank you for, I'm glad I even mentioned that, because I do think that some of the things that have been said here tonight are extremely important, and some really good questions. And we're at a point in time with so much shifting and changing and so much future possibilities that I don't want to screw it up.
Thank you, Lindy. Melissa, Russ, did you want to make one?
That was
Well, I was going to make a statement that I could do that.
Okay. Russ, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so much of what I said before, without belaboring the point, is that, that for us to be playing chess pieces, trying to sort of figure out the scenarios, I think is a real mistake for the Planning Commission. I mean, that is what the school board does. I certainly watched it from a pretty front row seat for the last couple of years, and they are thinking about these things. They have an immediate problem, and all I can say is I know that from real experience with my child, and that if you asked me to sort of talk about this $99 million number that's on this document, that to me requires tremendous planning. We talked about that. I would like to say, or sort of mention strenuously, whatever the correct word is, that the operating budget funds some sort of study for that we're not gonna, it sounds like, put into this document. And I don't know what that feasibility study is. To do the feasibility study for the City Hall is $200,000. This seems like such a larger project to figure out the schools, and I don't know if that's something that we fit into the general budget so easily in 2014. But sort of back to the Mount Daniel 2.4, to me this is such a small number. I have a different threshold than clearly other people on the commission do, that it's not the 99 million that we're talking about without long-range planning. This is a number to me that I can handle and trust the school board has thought through on this short-term problem that they're really having, and that it's not for us to sort of say, well, maybe we should do an expansion here, make it 2 levels or 3 levels. To me, that is a bigger planning exercise that this 2.4 million doesn't try to capture.
Okay, I just have one quick question before you go, Melissa. On the $500,000 for 2015, we have, and I think some other commissioners have been getting some comments and a little bit of push to move it up. And you're saying it's not a good idea. Why would they want to do that if it's not a good idea?
I believe we have a difference of opinion, and that's valid. They want to start sooner than later, and they want to know the money's available and not wait till FY15. Most of their focus had been on the voter referendum, and I think that's legitimate. That's certainly the first big step, but we actually can't do anything with the land until we do a formal boundary line adjustment, unless we really want to do all of that through Fairfax County, which I would suggest not.
Right. Okay, so,
Well,
I'm just, I'm just wondering if it would be helpful to them, to the school board, to move that money up. And maybe it would help them. I know it's not allowed to go for planning, but whatever, they must have a reason that they're asking for that to happen, so.
They believe they can start the A&E, and not discounting that, that's their belief, and I respect that. It's just what I've presented to you, having worked with the city manager, is what we need to believe is the bigger picture first. If you choose to move the 500,000 forward, which is your prerogative to do, because of the financial feasibility of affording the debt service in FY14, you would need to deduct 500,000 from some other project. This won't tap the debt service cap because we're not at the 12%, but from the affordability in terms of the city manager's building his budget with this sort of being the worst case of what might be there, you need to move these chess pieces, which is in your purview.
Right.
well, are you suggesting that there is $500,000 worth of planning money in the regular old operating budget?
We believe we can reach a solution with either excess revenues out of this year, some money out of next year's budget, which is under development, or the schools could elect to prioritize some of their money too and do it as a joint venture, because it needs to be a joint venture with the general government and the schools.
Okay.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
But you certainly could, to Mr. Wodiska's point, is make that as an intent that the Planning Commission desires that to be funded.
Yes.
And again, it goes back to the technical aspect of a conceptual plan and an AE plan. And the fact is that it doesn't make any sense to move that money to this year, because really what we're trying to do is to do a conceptual plan, place the building, know where everything is before we can even start doing all of the architectural and engineering on the building itself. So I'm not really sure what the rush is for the school, because you've got your conceptual plan, which will give you what you need before you can even allocate money to an AE firm.
And if everything went swimmingly and stayed on schedule, nothing precludes a mid-year budget adjustment to fund a study if we don't wait for the beginning of FY15.
All right, Melissa?
But I do want to make sure you're clear, and you've obviously have heard from the school board, they do desire the money
Yeah, we
early.
have.
It's just not my recommendation.
I just want to make one quick comment that, you know, I am passionate about the schools, and it's because they are so valuable to our city. And I do have, you know, 3 children, one that's already graduated from Mason, one at MEH, one at TJ, so it's a big part of my life, and that's one of the reasons why I'd like to see better planning. Because I know, looking at the future, my 2 kids that are left in the school system are going to go through construction probably, or one is going through construction now, and I'd like to make it really worth their while to have had to, you know, when you look at TJ, it's been minor things, but it's very difficult to get to the playground now, and so they're not outside as much as they used to. I mean, they're minor issues, but, and I've also toured the preschool, and I have seen that, I mean, the space isn't that big, and I can understand why they'd like to go to a full-day program. One of my children had dyslexia and had IEP, and our special ed teachers are just fabulous in the city, and they do really great work, and I could see why they'd want more time with the kids, because they really want to see the kids, you know, overcome their issues as much as possible. So I get all that, but, and this, you know, my issue here is not that I don't support the schools fully, it's that I'd like to see better planning, I'd like to see better additions that work better for us in the future, that have long-term value. And I understand, Russ, what you're saying, that the 2.4 million doesn't seem that much, but it does seem a lot to me. It especially seems a lot when you look at a little bit more than that, double that is what we use for the TJ edition. So it's actually can do a lot with 2.4 million. Yeah, so that's one of the issues. But anyway, I have a motion if we're ready.
Yes, I'm ready for a motion.
Okay. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council approve pursuant to Section 6.19 of the City Charter and Section 17.08 of the City Code, the FY 2014-2018 CIP as presented on January 22nd, 2013, with the modification of moving the 2.4 million for Cherry Street in FY 14 to be combined with the 5 million for the future Mount Daniel expansion in FY 15. I think we'd also like to add that a comment go to council that the funds for planning up at the high school site needs to be put in the operating budget to support the funds that are in the CIP
Is there a second?
sooner. And FY 14, those funds would be needed.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Meeks. Any comments?
I have a question. So if I don't want to support this motion, maybe this is a message for Ms. G, but I am supportive of the rest of the CIP. So I'm not, this is a first on the CIP where I'm not sure what, do I need to not support the whole CIP if I'm
That's
not
correct.
okay with this motion?
In this current motion, it's a yes or no, and you would, if you wanted to vote no for Cherry Street, you would be voting for the rest, unless you put a comment on the record. I would entertain and defer to the Planning Commission's clerk if you want to split up
We have more than one
the
vote.
CIP and do the facilities separate maybe, or just the schools part and everything else.
Well, you're welcome to amend the motion if you'd like to do that.
Because I'm also not going to support that specific motion.
Well, we could, I'm open to having 2 votes on it if you'd like to amend the motion.
I would like to have 2 votes, because there's 30, 40 projects on here that I do support.
Okay.
I'm not sure how to procedurally do that, though. When I modify the motion, I need some guidance on that. I don't even have the motion in front of me, I apologize.
Oh, here, sorry.
Yeah, I think you would,
It's in there somewhere. I think what you can do, can you ask for amendment that we support the full CIP except for public facilities?
Which is taken as a separate vote.
And
Yeah.
that public facilities would be taken as a separate vote with the modification that I made, that the 2.4 million is moved from Cherry Street to the Mount Daniel. And also, I guess you also agree with the comment that council needs to push the funds for planning and F-114 from operating budget.
But I don't think that
I
helps
do,
Melissa.
and I think I've sort of said that, but I don't need to make a further
Okay.
vote.
Melissa, we-
Okay,
If I could clarify, you could also just do the public schools facilities
Yeah.
if you agree with the
Yes.
city hall and
Because you don't want to see all the
investment.
public facilities because
Right,
of the
okay.
city hall stuff, and so
okay,
you
well,
want to
let's,
just pull out the school.
Melissa, why don't you withdraw your motion?
Okay.
And make another motion to separate the two?
Okay, this will be more fun. Okay, so I'm going to withdraw my motion, and Rob, you're okay with that, a second? So now we have two motions. The first motion is, I move that the planning commission recommend that city council approve pursuant to section 6.19 of city charter and section 17.08 of the city code, the FY 2014-2000 CIP, all sections but the school public facilities section, as presented on January 22nd, 2013, with a comment to the council that funds for planning needed in the operating, but, well, no, I should go with the other one, probably, sorry. Okay, so anyway, so that we're gonna approve everything but the school public facilities section. So that's
Second.
motion one, second.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait, we'll
Sorry.
vote on
I know.
that first.
Sorry.
We're going to vote on that motion first.
Okay.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions about what the current motion on the floor is?
You want me to read it?
It's approving the CIP as presented, except for the sections related to the school's public facilities.
Okay.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I felt like,
Ms. Hockenberry?
Yes.
Mr. Meeks?
Yes.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Ms. Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
yes.
Mr. Bodiska?
Yes.
Mr. John?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous.
Okay, so now our second motion. I move that the planning commission recommend that the city council approve pursuant to section 6.19 of city charter and section 17.08 of the city code, the FY 2014-2018 CIP for school public facilities as presented on January 22nd, 2013, with the modification of moving the 2.4 million for Cherry Street in FY 14 to be combined with the 5 million for the future Mountain Daniel expansion in FY 15, with the additional comment to council that funds for school planning needed for the high school and MEH facilities be put in the operating budget for FY 2014.
Thank you. Do you have that? Okay.
Okay.
Do we have a second to for that?
Second.
Okay. Misty?
I have one
Yes,
comment,
oh,
just
sorry.
that I do support the moving of getting the operating funds for the planning in there. I support that
I
part.
think we all support that.
I do too.
I said that out loud.
Yeah.
Yes, please note that Mr. Wodisca and Mr. Rankin support the moving the,
That they need to
yes.
put planning funds in the operating budget.
yes.
Or do we
Planning
need a
funds in the operating.
separate motion?
No, we don't.
no.
No, they're just,
That's just a comment.
yeah, they're,
They'll get it.
yeah, because that's just a recommendation and not, okay.
All right, so this is the roll call?
This is the
vote
roll
on
call
the
for
second
that.
motion.
Exactly,
second motion.
Concerning the school's public facilities funding.
exactly.
Correct.
Mr. Meeks?
Yes.
Mr. Rankin?
No.
Ms. Rogers?
Yes,
Mrs. Teets?
Yes.
Mr. Wodiska?
No.
Mr. John?
Yes.
Ms. Hockenberry?
Yes.
The motion passes 5-2.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commission, for your help and diligence working through the FY 14-18 CIP, and I will transmit your motion that Ms. G, I know, will kindly type up for me.
Oh, do you need a memo on that? I mean, I think we certainly had enough comments on it.
I think that's very helpful, and with the motion and the intent that you added and the additional comments, I will also make sure the superintendent and school board know to watch the video.
Thank you. And thank you for all your hard work and great explanations on all aspects of the CIP. It's
My pleasure.
very well presented, yes.
Wonderful job.
Thank you.
Windows, fire station.
Put them in.
And bring us over to look at them. But I don't do windows.
Okay, I'm going to stay on the old business because I have a question for you. We were given some homework on the comp plan. Is that something we need to it's not on the agenda, but I didn't know if we need to discuss it tonight or if we just need to continue to get our comments in.
Well, if we could see where everybody is and we collect it,
Okay, well, I have sent my comments in, and
Yeah,
I
I
hope
also-
everyone else has.
Yeah, I sent my comments in already to Ms. Perry about the,
okay, I'm doing my homework.
Well, she said that the deadline was today, but I think she might give you another couple of days. I hope.
But what we could do is then we get it ASAP.
Right.
Put it together and then
Then we'll come back and discuss it. Yes, good.
whatever the thought. Very much appreciated when you take a look at it.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay, thank you. We'll move along to new business, which we have none. Other business, there's none on our agenda. We'll go to the approval of minutes for February the 4th, 2013. Oh, do you have I'm sorry, we kind of skipped your report because you weren't here, but would you like to give that?
I'll keep it real brief. We did have, some of you may have heard, one of our staff persons, Kurt Deschemaker, had an accident and
Oh,
slipped when we had an icy morning and broke his leg, and he's been out of the office and had a number of surgeries. So he's finished the third surgery and is recuperating in a rehabilitation center. So it's a very valuable person and key part of our building safety and counter and zoning staff. So we all wish him well, but I wanted you all to be aware of that. We are trying to fill in for him, but he's not someone you can replace easily.
Yeah.
So, but I wanted to mention that to you. So we're all trying to keep in touch with him and hope he can be back. But it will be a somewhat lengthy recovery. So.
I have a question. A neighbor said neighbors had said that they had come up to the planning department on Thursday, and it's closed on Thursday. Is that something?
We've closed on
ongoing?
Thursday partially because of this problem. And what we've found is that we need time to do the work after we talk to people at the counter. I'd kind of describe it as somewhat like an iceberg. You come in, you have an experience with the people at the counter, and they accept information, give you back information, you fill out forms. Then there's a lot of work after that has to be done. And it's very, very busy, so we've not had downtime to then do that work. And so we're looking at doing that on Thursdays.
Okay.
It was our least busy day, so that we can catch up and then schedule inspections, get everything entered into the computer, et cetera. And part of that is the loss of Mr. Deschemaker, who also was one of those key staff people. But we're going to be doing that for a period of time. We've also identified this is one of our unmet needs in our budget in terms of additional administrative help and work at the counter, because it's been very, very busy. We have a lot of activity. So that is, in fact, what we've been doing at the moment.
I just think it might be a good idea to put it on the website, because the website says Monday to Friday.
Yeah,
So
that's-
people then wouldn't come up on Thursday.
We'll communicate with communications and make sure that's aware. But we picked that day as the least busy day. But there is work going on. We're also taking internal customers.
We know you're
where-
not taking vacation on that day.
We have some people, for example, need to pay bonds and things like that who are public works. So internally, work is going on for those kinds of people and those issues, which may take additional time than, say, just activities over the counter.
Okay, good. I think that's good. So we will now move on to approval of minutes.
I have one question.
Oh, yes, yes.
I noticed on here that we have this small area plan community meeting for South Washington, and then you also have the one for starting the city center one, so that's really great. I'm assuming for the South Washington Street small area plan, at one of the meetings previous, we'll get a presentation of where we are so that we're ready for that.
Yes, and there has been we need to figure out when the best time to do that is. There is a lot of work that's going on. Tentatively, there's talk about having a check-in with the City Council and the Planning Commission on the 1st of April.
Okay, great.
I don't know if that's a hard date at this point, given all the moving parts of things we're working on, but that would be in advance of the session on the 20th with the, we might get the draft plan out there for the public to hear about and then get some reactions.
Okay, great, thank you.
We also are looking at the, tentatively, the 4th of March, I think we've gotten the word out about the listening session for Greenway Downs. The council has interest in having a joint work session with the commission on March 4th as well to look at, get caught up on split lots and possibly also the Chesapeake Bay. How much of that we can all handle in advance of the other meeting is something we'll have to talk through. And of course, you heard tonight the interest in having a work session for the commission to look at the Harris Teeter project. So, well, I think it makes sense for myself, Ms. Rogers, Ms. G to meet to see what looks like the best schedule, and then check with the rest of the commission.
Right.
See if that meets your schedules.
And I am going to be out of town until, starting on the 22nd of March through the 6th of April. Just
Okay.
throwing that out.
So Rob will be in charge.
And
Russ?
I'll be out of town the first week of March.
The first week of
I'm
March.
gonna miss the next meeting.
Okay.
But just when we set up this meeting, I hope that, on the development, I hope we have the developers there too.
Well, without a big presentation, you know.
No big presentation, but somebody who could answer questions and have a dialogue with.
Well, certainly, we had a lot of thorough discussion tonight in terms of the presentation, so you're looking for a more informal setting to talk
Right.
through issues.
Right.
And it would be helpful if you all do have vacation plans that are going to be out, if you can let Ms. G know, and we'll try to put it into our calendar to make sure that we can coordinate with you as best we can and get you proper information.
Okay. Now, we will move on to the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes? Any any amendments or edits? Yes, Mr. Meeks?
Well, I thought you were going to move, I was...
I was going to, but you look ready?
Okay, yeah,
Okay, I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes of February 4th are approved. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Meeting is adjourned.
You look like you really...